And so what happened here, case study, June 6th to 7th, this was a major flooding event. So any of you from the south side, any of you from Bloomington, Columbus, Martins, Tucky, Morris, Tucky, any of those places, you know this event. You know this weather event because you were essentially flooded. What happened here? What happened was we had two weird things. We had one weird thing, let's say. Typically, these mid-latitude cyclonic systems, typically they move in a 3 to 10 day pattern. So every 3 to 10 days, we get a one coming through. We kind of wait for about a couple days, and then another one comes through, and so forth. The abnormality that happened here was we had two cold fronts, two major low-pressure cells that came together back-to-back within like literally 24 hours of each other. And so what we had is we had two low pressures back-to-back, and thus with it, two major cold fronts came through back-to-back. And so when we have a cold front come through, that's when we're going to have those short, quick downbursts and a ton of rain in hardly any time, which thus a flash flood. And so here's day number one. We can see where these numbers are the highest in day number one. Day number one, anyone know that this is kind of Spencer, Indiana? Bloomington is, somewhere in this area, right? Down here, Vincennes. So it's kind of the south-central Indiana area. And so that's on June 7th, 2008. On the next day, like I said, the abnormality was another low pressure came through in less than 24 hours and dumped a ton of rain quite quickly. So much that then over here, we've got Jennings County, Seymour, Indiana, Columbus, Indiana. And so then the next day, this area got dumped with a ton of rain from a cold front coming through. So we had this back-to-back situation, two separate areas, but we'll see why the flooding occurred near Vincennes. We'll see why that probably right now. 7 hours of rainfall. So just talking about 7 hours of rainfall produced. This would be the record in Indiana. But because it wasn't observed by a trained meteorologist, because it was observed by Joe the plumber or whoever, it's not official. But nonetheless, it still showcases 10 inches of rain. Trust me, that's a good amount of rain. That's almost like what they find like every day in South Asia, as far as the amount of rain they find there. But all these various places, Paragon, Spencer, are all south central Indiana that were heavily affected by this flash flood incident. And so the White Star is Naptown, where we are right now. So the white star to kind of give you an idea of where we are. And so the purple, this would be an isoline map showcasing precipitation. The purple would be the areas that were hit that had the most amount of rain. So the areas that have the most amount of rain would once again be this south central area. If you can kind of see, what's this guy right here? Or gal. Could be a gal. That's the White River West Fork. So we have a river coming right through here. That river right there, that's the same river that goes right through here, goes right through this part of the state. And so keep that in mind. The fact we have a river that comes through this area that got dumped on with a huge amount of precipitation. Also, we got a river coming through here. This is where it's really confusing. This is the White River. This is the White River. Two separate rivers called the same thing. But the difference is one's called the West Fork, the other one's called the East Fork. And so we have the West Fork and the East Fork, which both together come together right here and then eventually dump into our good friend the Wabash. So that's key. And everything is going this direction. All the pretty much in Indiana, everything south of this area here heads towards the Gulf of Mexico. So right now, if I went outside and urinated on the sidewalk, eventually it would work its way to the Gulf of Mexico. Because everything slopes, works its way to the White River, which works its way to the Wabash, what have you. So here we can see actually it's an active remote sensed image in which they play with the colors to make it look like it's natural. And so here would be the before. And so what they did was anything that's kind of a murky brown, which would indicate floodwaters, areas of water on the surface. Anything that's murky brown, they go in the computer program. This is where GIS and people have jobs in geography. And they go in, they turn that muddy-looking brown into blue so that you can then visually easily see where flooding occurred. And so here's before the storm. Here's after. And so all those blue areas are where we see that flooding that occurred. And if you know anything about this area, yeah, it's largely agricultural, but a lot of people live along these rivers. If you think about before, we had automobiles, planes, trains, and automobiles. Overwhelmingly, we lived along rivers because it was our food source, but our transportation source as well. And if we think about this, once again, there's our good friend, the White River West Fork, and the White River, the East Fork. We can see this flooding really hit this area right here. But once again, water flows downhill. And so, although the rain event was huge here, and a lot of flooding occurred here, a lot of flooding also occurred further downstream, and that makes sense. All that water just doesn't disappear. It all collects into this one area. And so this flooding, once again, was due to two low pressures that came back to back, which is abnormal, and dumped a huge amount of rain as those two cold fronts, within 7 hours of each other, dumped all this rain. So here, this is Columbus. This is Columbus, Indiana. One of the problems they had there was their hospital flooded. And so one of the things is, what do you do when all of a sudden you've got emergency room patients, you've got kids that are being born, and so a lot of that, they had to actually move them out of that area because of the flooding. And where's Columbus? It's where the East Fork of the White River begins, to go back and use those previous terms. This is where Johnny Cougar Mellencamp's from. This is farmland in Seymour, Indiana. And so once again, a huge amount of rain that was dumped here. Then over time, the low-lying areas quickly flood. In this case, along a river, you're going to see a lot of flooding.